Dr. Tracey Owens Patton is also a professor in the UW Department of Communication and Journalism, and for several years, her cross-cultural communication class has helped charitable organizations overseas. In this course, they don't just study theory and write papers, they do the fundraising. Most recently, the class raised enough money to provide for the basic needs of children at the Shalom Garden Orphanage in Kenya. Dr. Patton explained how this works.
Dr. Owens Patton, tell us about Shalom Orphanage.
Shalom Garden Orphanage is a really wonderful organization. It's really small. It actually started out with one woman who's now the owner and director of the orphanage, literally having a child placed at her doorstep. And she took this child in because the child was abandoned because their parents died of AIDS and HIV complications. And so once she took in one child, the next day there's literally a knock at her door. She opens her door and there were 3 more children. And so the orphanage just grew from there. It was really her heart that just started taking in children. From there she just decided that she would create an orphanage and a place for these children to be.
So tell us how this ties into your course on cross-cultural communication.
It's actually a perfect opportunity for cross-cultural communication. Cross-cultural communication is looking at how you can apply communication around the world into contexts. And typically in classrooms when cross-cultural communication is taught, it's you learn theories, you read in a book, and you read about different groups. And I thought I'd make the class just a little more unique and see how these theories and concepts apply in real life situations. Are the theories apt? Are the way that scholars tell students to approach cross-cultural situations correct? And so I thought the best learning process for the students, and honestly for myself, would be to apply the concepts in a real-world situation. In this case, we learned about the Shalom Garden Orphanage and thought, what an ideal opportunity.
How did you find out about it?
I learned about Shalom Garden Orphanage actually through one of my students who's now a PhD student here at the University of Wyoming. The year before we began working with the Shalom Garden Orphanage, I decided to do little steps instead of just saying, oh, we're going to work with a client and see how it goes. So we first began this class with working with Rwandan genocide survivors. And so from there, I said, oh, well, this is a really established organization. I'd like to work with something that's really at the grassroots level, that really doesn't have any funding, that is literally almost a hand-to-mouth kind of organization. And so one of my students, who happens to be Kenyan here on campus, said, you know, I know about this orphanage. It's the Shalom Garden Orphanage, and my friend is running it. And I thought, maybe we'll go ahead and give that a try. And so I contacted the woman via email, and then slowly we began to talk, and I learned that this would be a wonderful opportunity for my students.
Well, other than awareness and empathy, what constructive communication skills are these students applying to this project?
Sure. Well, once the students know what client they're working with, the students are actually the people who lead what they're going to do. So what I do as the professor of the classroom, I say, here's the group we're going to work with. Here are some of their exigent needs. Here, what do you want to do with this group? And so from there, the students learn everything that they can about the background, and that's the first half of the class. And then the second half of the class is where some of the aspects of the classroom they can use for their own portfolios and help them get internships. And some of my students have actually turned their experience from the classroom into jobs. And so what the students do is they're working and learning about public relations, being a community liaison and getting the community involved. They're learning grant writing and budgeting, and they're also learning advertising, so how to make persuasive advertising campaigns, working with all the various media outlets throughout the state. So they're learning skills that they can put into practice as communication majors that they can eventually use for their career.
What are some of the results or the impacts on the orphanage itself?
The orphanage has changed tremendously. When we first encountered the orphanage, they were receiving $100 every month from a church in Virginia. And since my class began working with them, they've received almost $20,000 in 2 years. And so the first year, we were working for their essential needs. The orphanage in the first year only had 20 children, and they were ages 3 to 8. And so all of the children had been abandoned. All their parents had died from AIDS, HIV. There was no relative to take them in. There was a 2-year-old at the time. She was taken out of a dumpster. I mean, these are children with real exigent needs. And so the orphanage had literally not a lot. The children at the time were eating 1 meal a day. There were 4 of them who would share a bed, a pillow, a blanket, and so on and so forth. And so that's what my students did that first year, was really working for essential needs. And after that first year, the students raised over $8,800. And so every child ended up having their own pillow, their own blanket, their own bedding, their custom-made beds for them. Their meals increased from 1 meal a day to 3 meals a day. And some of them began to get medical care. And with the money left over, the orphanage actually started their own organic farm. So, I mean, we could see the difference that was happening in these children's lives. The second year, this 2008, when we worked with the orphanage, we thought, well, what's needed? And so we worked with the director again, and she said, well, what's really needed is education. So now that they have the food met, the bedding met, we need to get all the children in school from the primary level, the preschool level, if you will, all the way through to our equivalent of 4th grade. And so that's what we did, and we made enough money that every child, they were able to take in 2 more children, so now there's 22 children at the orphanage, and every child has their educational needs paid for: books, uniforms, shoes, which is really important because if you don't have shoes, you can't get access to school, tuition, everything, transportation, everything's paid for the next 2 years for these children.
This must be incredibly empowering for the students to see that they can make a difference, a big difference.
Absolutely. I mean, and they're such a creative bunch of students. I mean, I bring to them the client, but they come up with the ideas. I guide them. I say what works, what doesn't work, and along the way, they're learning critical cross-cultural communication skills. They're learning the theories, and they're learning appropriate communication, because communication differs amongst people in co-cultures and nationally and internationally as well.
Well, is this type of project common in the academic world?
I think it's becoming more common just because there's an emphasis on service learning courses and an emphasis on social justice. And we see that social justice emphasis here at UW, for example, as well. So I think it's growing. You don't see many cross-cultural communication courses around the nation that work with a client like we've been working with in the last 3 years.
What do you hope happens now at the orphanage?
I hope that the orphanage can kick us out. I hope that we have worked towards sustainability. I don't want my class or my students and I to be the next colonizer for this group of people.
How so?
Well, I don't want them to be dependent on us, and I don't want them to think that any changes that they want to do with the orphanage, whether they want to use any extra money they may have from our fundraising for food, because we now know that there is a drought happening in Kenya and food is a big concern. I don't want them to think, oh, we can't do this because Dr. Patton's class didn't approve. I want them to be able to say, you know what? What you and your class have done for us is absolutely wonderful. We thank you for being with us for these foundational years, but we don't need you anymore.
So you'll be looking for a new project?
Absolutely. And the orphanage has said to us that food is their exigent concern, but that they're doing okay, and that they may not need us for this fall of 2009. So I'd actually like to bring the cross-cultural course back home and do something local, since there's so many people who are in need here just in the state of Wyoming with regard to the economy and whatnot.
Dr. Tracey Patton, we've run out of time, but I'm so glad to hear about the good works you've started and obviously are going to continue in one way or another.
Absolutely. It makes me challenged, and the students really enjoy it as well.